Throughout their years of operation, developer Factor 5 Inc. found themselves constantly the subject of rumours in the press. These varied wildly, sometimes outlandish in nature, but there was one in particular that recurred time and time again, even well after the studio closed. This was the suggestion that at one stage or another, they had been trying to tackle Nintendo's Pilotwings series. To what extent exactly this was true has long remained unclear. With input from former associates of the companies involved, we will delve into this labyrinthine web of hearsay and uncover the truth behind Factor 5's mysterious flight project. The late 90s saw Factor 5 establish a good relationship with Nintendo, beginning with their development of advanced sound tools for the Nintendo 64. In 2001, Factor 5's Star Wars Rogue Squadron 2 Rogue Leader released as a GameCube exclusive. It was well received among critics and fans alike. For Nintendo, on the other hand, with its exclusivity and showcase of the console's graphical prowess, it was a show of support for which they were grateful. While Factor 5 commenced work on another title exclusive to Nintendo system, commentators began to speculate. With the groundwork now laid, could it only be a matter of time before the two would collaborate on a classic Nintendo property? By 2003, the rumour mill was ablaze. After finding some initial success around launch, the GameCube's performance had floundered considerably by this point, a cause for concern among Nintendo's investors and consumers. Their president Satoru Iwata didn't shy away from addressing this. At E3 2003, he took the stage at Nintendo's press conference and candidly discussed areas in which he felt the company had failed.
We didn't release enough exclusive titles. Then, in the second half, high-quality games like Mario Sunshine and Metroid Prime did not fully meet our expectations.
Immediately after that, he unveiled the GameCube's third-party lineup, starting by enthusiastically introducing a brand new Rogue Squadron game from Factor 5.
The talented designers at LucasArts have given us a beautiful exclusive, Rebel Strike.
When the reveal trailer concluded, what Iwata said next would set in motion over a decade of speculation.
And the same talented people at Factor 5 who designed this game are also at work on another exclusive for GameCube. You will be hearing more about this soon.
Contrary to that statement, this unnamed exclusive was never again spoken of officially. A couple of news sites, however, were confident that they had identified it. GameSpot reported on this apparent game in late April 2003, approximately 1 month prior to the aforementioned E3 event. They were adamant that Factor 5's next project, being developed alongside Rebel Strike, was a GameCube installment of Pilotwings. IGN claimed they had also heard these rumours, but that it wouldn't be shown at E3. In addition, they reached out to the head of Factor 5 Inc., Julian Egbrecht, who confirmed they did have a second project in the works, while declining to comment further. Other sites such as Spong chimed in, saying that as well as a GameCube game, Nintendo was in the process of remaking the original Pilotwings for Game Boy Advance. As the years went by, no such titles emerged, and the theory that Factor 5 had been developing a Pilotwings was made more uncertain by statements from IGN's former Nintendo editor, Matt Casamassina, who was responsible for their original story about it. When it was revealed that Factor 5 had in actuality signed an exclusivity deal with Sony, Matt wrote on his blog that he believed it had been cancelled. He also admitted the following: "I have no idea if legitimate work was ever really done on the now-defunct project, nor do I know if Nintendo has since assigned it to another developer." In other words, there was little solid evidence to suggest that this project had ever really gotten off the ground, or even existed. Nonetheless, in an article written by Craig Harris for IGN from 2010, he wrote that Nintendo had kicked the game to the curb. In retrospect, not a lot of the media narrative surrounding Factor 5's GameCube projects had any basis in fact. It appears to have largely been a product of rumours and guesswork, but there is some truth to it after all. Ex-employees of the now defunct development house and its former president Julian Egbrecht were able to provide some clarity. During 2001, while the company was hard at work on Star Wars Rogue Squadron 2, their management meanwhile had entered talks with Nintendo Nintendo to work on one of their franchises. On Factor 5's side, the movement was being spearheaded by Julian Eggebrecht. In addition to running the San Rafael studio, Julian was responsible for the creative direction of almost all of their games. Their Nintendo project was another which he was at the helm of. He proposed to Nintendo a drastic reinvention of Pilotwings. Julian described the undertaking to me as a true passion project of his. It was a title which he held dear, that drew upon many cultural influences, including some of his favourite films. For Pilotwings, it was a complete reboot. Some of the sentiments and ideas of the original Super Nintendo game were intact, but otherwise it reimagined everything into a vastly different setting. Factor 5's Pilotwings took place during the first decades of the Cold War. It was based around the rapid advancement of aviation technology from around the time, as well as the historic space race between the United States and the Soviet Union. As the director of the project, one of Julian's main inspirations for this approach was the 1983 epic The Right Stuff. A favourite movie of his, The Right Stuff portrayed the events leading up to and execution of Project Mercury, the first manned spaceflight by the US. Other major influences included Dr. Strangelove and The Manchurian Candidate. Aspects of these, Julian revealed, were informing a large part of his plan for the game. Where elements of more traditional Pilotwings came in were the title's narrative and structural setup, as well as its earlier missions. Like the original SNES Pilotwings, the opening portion would have seen the player enrolling in a flight school. Using various aircraft, they advanced through challenging training courses to earn pilot licenses. Eventually, they are recruited right out of flight school as a test pilot for the military, thrust into action amidst the rising tensions of the Cold War backdrop. Many of the earlier levels would have been typical Pilotwings fare before players progressed to more tasking military operations. A designer who was party to the prototype developed for the game claimed that some of these would have incorporated elements of stealth. Some would have required players to carefully avoid detection from radars, for example. The idea for this style was introduced in around late 2002, following the rise in popularity of the original Tom Clancy's Splinter Cell game. It should be noted that this was not the first instance in which Factor 5 experimented with stealth flight gameplay. In the Rogue Squadron series, for instance, there were some attempts to incorporate stealth, such as the Imperial Academy heist level from Rogue Leader, in which players have to sneak into a base and steal a shuttle. Aside from early prototypes, little of the GameCube Pilotwings was ever completed. When Star Wars Rogue Squadron 2 was finished, the developers went on to its sequel soon after. Factor 5 Inc. was not a large studio, and the publishers of the Rogue Squadron games, LucasArts, had set them a deadline of October 2003. This meant that the company would need as many of their staff on Rebel Strike as possible, and simultaneously managing the full development of another game, Pilotwings, would not be possible. Nintendo would have to wait until they were ready. Pilotwings for GameCube was the only proposal from Factor 5 that Nintendo legitimately wanted to move forward with. It was a game that they were excited to see come to fruition, and Mr. Iwata's tease of the project at E3 2003 serves to exemplify this. While IGN's claims that Nintendo would eventually ditch the game do not ring true, by the time Iwata made his elusive comment, all was not right. By 2003, the GameCube was struggling. Publishers were starting to grow cautious of investing in it, and LucasArts, who was funding Rebel Strike as a GameCube exclusive, was particularly concerned. Nintendo was rapidly losing market share to the PS2 and Xbox, a fact which LucasArts was well aware of. They began requesting that Factor 5 break its exclusivity with the GameCube and start developing for another console with the potential to reach a larger audience. Although the PlayStation 2 was the market leader by a substantial margin, it was incapable of preserving the graphical fidelity of the Rogue Squadron games. The Xbox, on the other hand, was able to, prompting LucasArts to ask the developers to port their GameCube games over to it. Their requests, however, didn't end at simply porting over the Star Wars titles. They also wanted them to find a way to rework Pilotwings into a game for the Xbox. Factor 5 at first was reluctant, but as the GameCube situation grew more disconcerting, so did the pressure from LucasArts continue to mount. The publisher was their main partner, and by funding their project, projects and providing them with access to the Star Wars property, they were a key part of their success. LucasArts had become majorly invested in the development house, and in 2003 they even granted them a loan of over $4 million. By around May 2003, Factor 5's management had started to seriously consider what LucasArts was proposing. Obviously, Nintendo would never allow them to use Pilotwings or any of their intellectual property to the benefit of a competing platform, so a contingency would have to be found. The developers, who had found their success by using licensed IP, were not interested in releasing it as an original property. Since the Right Stuff movie was the game's foremost cultural inspiration at this stage, the main suggestion floating around became that they should retrofit it into an official Right Stuff video game. On May 21st, 2003, Nintendo confidently teased that this other GameCube exclusive was on its way. Unbeknownst to them, that exclusive was already slipping away. About only 2 weeks before the press conference, Factor 5 had already filed a trademark for the Right Stuff, their contingency to develop the game for the Xbox should the GameCube situation not improve. Rebel Strike released in late 2003 and undersold somewhat, performing notably worse than its predecessor. To them, this seemed like the time to cut their losses and stop investing in Nintendo's machine. Factor 5 agreed. As opposed to starting full production on the GameCube Pilotwings, they entered a relationship with Microsoft to work on the Xbox. Nintendo and Factor 5's close partnership was fizzling out, but they remained on good terms. At this juncture, their work on Pilotwings was used in an attempt to pitch a new flight game to publishers, one that would theoretically adopt the Right Stuff IP. It all hinged on whether or not they were interested in such a game, as well as whether or not they would be willing to pay Warner Brothers for the rights. They were not. Consequently, their flight project was shelved, and Factor 5 began to focus on developing Star Wars Rogue Squadron games for the Xbox. Their dreams of producing a pure flight game were put on hold. This wasn't the last of Factor 5's involvement with Pilotwings, but for their original vision, informed by classic movies and the Cold War era, it was the end of the line. Julian Egbrecht, speaking to me in 2016, said that their idea for the GameCube reboot is something which he still believes should one day be realized. If you've enjoyed this video, please don't forget to subscribe for more. You can see many more unreleased games by clicking the annotations or by exploring my channel. You can see more from Factor 5, like their take on Kid Icarus, or you can see the story behind Nintendo's elusive Project Hammer. I've been Liam, I hope this video has been of interest, and have fun.